Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you for another Film Fanatic show. It is about 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. Today's our first official snow day. So, yeah, it's snowing quite a bit. I didn't realize we were going to be getting this amount of snow. I had someone tell me yesterday, oh, we might get a little bit of a snowstorm. And I was like, oh, okay. And then he said, well, it's probably just going to be like 3 to 5 inches. But I uh, I ended up going to the movies last night and just had a spectacular time. So I can't wait to talk about the movie I saw. And I drove, went to the 640 show, and went to the flagship cinema, which is located in Waterville. I drove about an hour away, and about a half hour or so into the trip, it was snowing, and I had a friend who I was meeting up there. Two friends. One of them was up there already in the area, and they said it was pretty dicey. So it was a little bit on the way up, but then it was clear sailing. But I got stuck behind cars that were just going excessively slow for not for no real reason because there wasn't any snow on the ground. So, but then the ride home was a little bit dicey. It was definitely slippery. And then today I woke up and I'm like, holy mackerel, it's snowing pretty hard. And then we had our first snow day today at work. So, yeah, happy winter. I do, I've said before and many times on a lot of these videos, I'm more of a summertime person. I'm not a huge wintertime person. But I do like the snow. So it is cool. It's not very cold out. It's like in the 30s or so. When it gets down to the teens or single digits, I'm not a fan, but this is not bad, and I actually do like the snow. So this is the first snow day of this year. So yeah. So last night I saw a movie that, quite simply, the only way I could put it was I was totally blown away by the entire experience, and that is the latest Godzilla movie, Godzilla minus one. I did not know anything about this movie. I went into this movie so incredibly cold. So, and I have said before, with trailers and things these days, and everybody and their grandmother talking about a movie, whether that person is, necessarily, qualified to really be giving a review or not. This movie, I still had not seen or heard anything about it. It was like a 3 or 4 weeks ago. I was on YouTube just randomly, and in my feed it came up Godzilla minus one trailer, and I was like, oh, what is that? And so I clicked on it, and I watched. It was like a 2 minute trailer, and I watched about a minute of it, and I was just like, holy shit, what the hell is this? And I was like, it looked amazing. And I didn't watch the entire trailer because the trailer was really good, really really good, but I purposely shut it off after about a minute because I was like, wow, okay, I don't want to. This looks really good, but I don't want to know or see anything else about it. So I shut it off, and I was like blown away that this was the latest, most recent installment of Godzilla, and it's a Japanese film with English subtitles. It's the latest from Toho Studios. Toho Studios is one of the one of the greatest studios in the world. They have been pumping out Godzilla films for almost 60 years, and it's astounding how many films they've done and how, as a company, they have like adapted to all the different trends, the different decades, and their use of how they adapt to using technology, practical effects, keeping things fresh, keeping things innovative, and just really entertaining. So, with that, that was all that I knew about this movie, and I loved the last Toho film that the last Godzilla film that Toho Studios had put out, Shin Godzilla, which came out probably about 3 to 5 years ago. I was a huge fan of that movie. That movie is so incredible and so awesome. Really original. It has a really great sci-fi angle to the film. Really creative, and I love that movie to death. So I had heard that they were going to keep, obviously put out another Godzilla film and, keep this whole thing alive. And so, but I didn't know when they were going to put out a new movie. So I was really surprised. And so I went with a couple of friends. I went with my friends, Aaron Kirkpatrick, who is a real great friend, and also um, my friend Michael Withers, who is another great buddy of mine, Michael Vickers, and he is just a great friend, and he's also very much into films, and so I was eager to talk to them about, hey, let's just go, and they were like, yeah, sure, and it wasn't planned out. We got tickets early online, and then we met at the theater, and we were literally the only people in the theater. There was like about 2 minutes into the movie, there was a couple that came in, and they sat like right behind us. And the and I have to say this, I was completely blown away. I thought this movie was just absolutely amazing on every level. The thing I was so taken aback by was how the story, the acting, and the whole narrative was like the main part of it. It had such an emotional depth to it, which I was really, really kind of shocked by. That it actually had a lot of depth to it. And it's a period piece. It takes place right after, or during, I should say, the tail end of the bombing of Japan. It's all in Japanese, English subtitles, and it's dealing with all kinds of issues dealing with grief and the Japan tr- trying to somehow find its way or its path or its meaning behind after having something so horrific happen. And each individual character in this movie has so much depth, and I cared about everyone and everything that was happening on the screen. And the when it comes to the actual Godzilla monster, it's it was incredible. I mean, this film. I had told a friend, my friend Aaron, that this film had reminded me a lot of the original Godzilla film from the 50s, because in that film they it's a very dark film, but they really portray Godzilla in a way of where he's much more of a villain, and he's just out hell bent on just pure survival. He's not empathetic towards the human race in any way, shape, or form. He's like a pure force of nature, and crushes everything that's in his wake or in his way. And it has a very dark tone. And this film really has that kind of tone. And a lot of the other Godzilla films, which like again, all I was raised on all of the classic Godzilla films from like the 50s, 60s, and 70s. That was all of those films were just like they were a product of my childhood. All the all of the classic kaiju movies from like the 50s, 60s, 70s, that Toho Studios had put out, just incredible, amazing. I mean, you have films like the original Godzilla, which came out in the 50s. Starting with Godzilla 1954, Godzilla raids again in 1955, King Kong vs. Godzilla 1963, Mothra vs. Godzilla 1964. That Mothra vs. Godzilla was probably as a kid the first one I had ever seen. Godzilla, the three-headed monster in 64, Invasion of Astro Monster in 1965, Son of Godzilla in 1967, Godzilla Destroy All Monsters 68, arguably probably the greatest Godzilla movie. All Monsters Attack in 1969, Godzilla vs. Hedorah in 71, Godzilla vs. Gigan in 72, Godzilla vs. Megalon in 73, Godzilla vs. Mega Godzilla in 74, Terror of Mega Godzilla in 75, Godzilla 1985, Godzilla vs. Biolente in 1989, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah in 1991, Godzilla and Mothra: The Battle for Earth in 92, Godzilla vs. Mega Godzilla 2 in 93. I mean, the list is just incredible. And again, all of these movies I remember as a kid seeing all of these movies as a little kid on cable and on television, and they were all of the classic Japanese movies were all syndicated here in the U.S. And again, I have to say, like, those are, those films are just so much a part of my DNA. They, as a kid, they just inspired so much imagination and wonder, and fantasy. They were in a lot of ways my introduction to science fiction and horror and just in general my love of monster movies. So, and I realized the other day I haven't done any shows on Godzilla, which is just a crying shame. And so this will be the start. I'm going to really take a deep dive into a lot of these classic movies. And I have to say that this movie, Godzilla Minus One, is definitely one of the greatest, if not the greatest, Godzilla movie I've ever seen. And again, this movie was so good to see in the theater. And the sound, we sat really close. We sat like in the second, I think it was, yeah, the second kind of area of the seating from where the screen was, like the second row area. And I was blown away by the sound in the theater. It was so immersive and it was so intense. I was astounded. I found out too that this movie only had the budget for this film was $11 million, and the look and the design, the aesthetic of this film is simply spectacular. The the whole line of where it was completely blurred between, say, CGI and practical effects, and the concept of a guy in a suit. Like, it was astounding how seamless it was. The the immersive nature of this movie was it made for one of the best, probably the best film going experience I have had this year. And totally, like, just for me, just drove the point home as to why having access to going to a film in a theater is so important. And I think that's how movies are meant to be seen, especially movies, in this kind of in this kind of light. And it was just incredible. I mean, the sound was like, it felt like the walls were shaking at times. The thing that is so great is that this movie, again, it has such an emotional resonance to it, and it has, but yet it's also such an incredible monster movie. Godzilla's whole approach and his whole design and kind of his motivations is that he's a pure monster and will crush anything in his way. He is not sympathetic. A lot of the other films in Toho Studios and again, I felt like this movie had something really connected to the original Godzilla, where Godzilla is very, very much a monster. He's incredibly menacing. He is, not sympathetic, has no empathy towards the human race, and is just hell bent on his own preservation, but on basically just pure destruction. And he's an evil monster essentially in the first one, and in a lot of the other Toho movies, the kind of the nature of Godzilla's characters always been a little bit different, but it moved more into where they started to, in a lot of the Toho movies, they started to introduce other monsters, and Godzilla kind of moved into an area where he became almost like the protector of those cities or of Japan or of the world, and to a degree became almost like a kind of a hero figure in a lot of those movies, where people were still afraid of him, but they also had great respect for him and admiration because he took on this role of where he was kind of this protector of the city. But not in this one. He's crushing and destroying everything in his wake. And so it has a very dark tone. And I prefer, like, I love all of the, like I said, I love all of the classic Toho films. And again, I read off about 15 or 20 movies just now. There's a whole shit ton of other films that I have not mentioned. There's so many movies, and you're talking Toho Studios has been putting out these great monster movies for decades, since the 50s, and here we are 2023, so it's just astounding. And so, but I honestly I prefer like the darker rendition of Godzilla, like the original that came out in the 50s. And this one really has that kind of vibe to it. But the other thing is just like the characterizations, the acting, the themes that this film deals with. I was not prepared by how good I was not prepared for how well that was done and how incredibly strong, how incredibly strong it was. Last night when I got home, I wanted to do a review, but I wanted to let the movie kind of resonate with me, and I can't really stop thinking about it. And so the main thing I remember thinking about after I saw Godzilla Minus One was, this is how you make a fucking movie. Like, this is how you make a movie. Because I feel like in the wake of, especially this year, and last year, the last few years, but especially this year, it's been a really kind of, I think the film market has been in this really dismal, dark, disenfranchised light. I haven't really seen too many newer films lately that have any depth to them, or that are even that entertaining. And I was like, my first feeling was like, this is like, Godzilla Minus One is the very definition of how you make a fucking movie. Like, how you tell a good story and just how you make it entertaining and you just tell a great story. And I was just like, please, please, Hollywood, take a look at this film and look at, and please watch this movie, because to me this is like the epitome of how to make just an incredible movie, just a kick-ass movie. I mean, you have the base of the film being a great story, a real interesting narrative, great acting, incredible direction, and just a kick-ass monster. Where, and it's like this perfect combination of all things that you want from a movie. The thing that I was so blown away by was when I found out this morning that this movie only cost $11 million. I was just like, what? Like, that's insane. Because, of course, now we are so overwhelmed and inundated with all of these Marvel movies that are coming out. Again, I have said many times I'm a huge Marvel fan, but I have reached a point of fatigue where I'm just exhausted and I just don't care for any to see any of the newer movies that have been coming out. And it's at a point now where like literally every other week or like 3 or 4 times a month there's a new Marvel movie coming out. And generally, the last Marvel movie that, as far as newer Marvel movies that I thought were really good, I really loved the last Spider-Man movie. I thought that was really really good, but that's been out for a couple of years, and there's been dozens since then. Um, and the thing that I was just astounded by was the budgets for a lot of those films is like at least $100 million, if not more, or 200 million. I mean, it's astounding how much money is used to make a lot of these big studio movies, not just Marvel movies for that matter. And I'm like, how the fuck did they do this movie for only $11 million in this day and age, and for it to look so spectacular? And that combined with just the really great story, and where you actually get a story that has some serious depth behind it, but yet it's super entertaining as all hell. And I was like, my jaw dropped when I found out that this movie only cost $11 million, and I was just like, this is how you make a fucking movie. Please, please, Hollywood, figure this shit out. Like, take a look at this movie and just see these obvious elements as to why this movie is so damn good. And it starts top to bottom with the core of this film being just a really good story that has a lot of care and love put into it, and really utilizing your budget. And you don't need to spend almost over $100 million for a film. And and also, in light of, it's very safe to say at this point that the mass public, and again, I do consider myself a huge fan of the Marvel universe. I own most of the movies that I love now on Blu-ray, but I've reached a point now where I've really lost interest in seeing new ones. And the rate that a lot of these movies are coming out is just, again, it's kind of mind numbing. But seeing how terribly these movies are doing in the box office, like all of these movies that are coming out that just have these massive fucking budgets, and there's still no end in sight as to how, the duration of how many of these movies are going to come out. And just seeing how it's obvious now to the public and to the world that people have generally lost an interest in a lot of these movies. And when you think about the amount of money that is being spent and literally being lost and being flushed down the toilet, and then you have this movie that comes along that only has 11 was made for $11 million. It's just like, what? Like, that's insane. That's crazy. To me, that's like, it's such a telling thing of just what a filmmaker can do for, in comparison, very little. It's just incredible. And I was like, why can't Hollywood just please do this? Why can't they? I mean, this is like such an example of really fine filmmaking on every level, and utilizing every cent for the screen. And a film that has, you could see that it was shot with like certain priorities in mind. The other thing is that this film has, the stakes are always high, so there's always this sense, especially around Godzilla's character, the stakes are always high, and there's always a level of tension. And there's such a great balance. There's such a great balance between the action, and the storyline. And this film was directed by Takashi Yamazaki, who I don't believe I've seen any of his other films. The other thing that is just astoundingly just off the charts is the soundtrack, the film score. Um, it's so cool because they use the original theme for Godzilla that's been used in all of the classic Toho movies. They use the soundtrack, that score or that theme in throughout this movie. So it's so I mean it's so damn effective and just so incredible and horrific and scary and also beautiful. It has this like real sweeping quality to it. And that I was really surprised by the depth of it for those reasons. The soundtrack and film score for Godzilla was composed by Nakio Sato, and again, the music is just so spectacular. It has such like this film. It has such a glorious dynamic range to it. There's you have these incredible moments of where it's really tender, really intimate, incredibly quiet, where you have all these great situations where you're starting to where you're introduced to these characters and you're seeing all of these themes that they're exploring and all of this information, and then when it comes to the action, it is like on 11 and it is so breathtaking, and it has such a great balance of all of those aspects, and the score for this film is just incredible. I mean, it's amazing. After the movie was done, we stayed, which I try to do anyway when I go to the movies, especially if it's a movie I'm digging. But I was after the film was over, I was literally glued to my seat, and I was so like pumped and excited. We stayed right to the end, and right through the end credits, and I was just totally lost in the music. It was just incredible. I really want to order the soundtrack and definitely get this movie on Blu-ray when it comes out. That's another crying shame. I feel almost embarrassed to admit. I I don't really own as much of a I'm such a huge Godzilla fan, and I have a really shitty collection of it's really piss poor. It's kind of sad. I only own a couple of the movies. I have a couple of Godzilla films from the '80s on DVD that I just bought like on a whim here and there, like at Goodwill. But I don't have any Blu-rays. I just so many the classic Toho movies I don't own. I don't know why that is the case, but that's going to change. Again, I've seen all of them. I've seen them all multiple times, but this will inspire me to like get off of my lazy ass and buy those movies because they're just spectacular, as well as this movie. The other thing that is just I watched a guy who reviewed this movie, and he had said that he's not really a huge fan of this genre, but he had only seen the American versions. The last 6 or 7 years, there's been a bunch of these American Godzilla films, Gaiju movies, that are, for all intents and purposes, are just awful. And there was a time where I briefly liked one of the Godzilla movies that came out a few years ago. Bryan Cranston's in it, and I kind of like this movie. After seeing this, I was just like, no, I need my head examined. That movie's a pile of shit. And this movie, I feel like, takes all of those American movies, all of the American movies that have come out, where you've had the Godzilla movie that came out, and then they were basically, the American companies were taking the kaiju movies, and they were going to kind of reboot them and put out a bunch of these newer movies. And they had Godzilla, the King Kong movie that came out before that, I believe, and then the last one they put out was Godzilla King of Monsters, and uh, and those movies really, after seeing this movie, you realize that they're just it's such a bunch of convoluted horseshit. Those movies are just awful. Everything about them, especially with the writing for those films, is so bad and it's atrocious. And this guy who was talking about Godzilla minus one, he really was really taken aback by how good it was. But that's literally the only movies he had ever seen. He's ever seen. He's never seen any of the Toho movies. And I'm just like, whatever, fuck this guy. So it's just, I just don't understand people anymore. But it's this movie single handedly, Godzilla minus ones literally takes all those movies and single handedly flushes them down the toilet in seconds. And I think, at face value, there's so many great films to the Toho Studios credit, but I kind of think that this might be the best one. Like it's an amazing film. And it's not just a monster movie. It's actually like a really, really, really well done movie. I'm almost going as far as to say that this might be the best movie I've seen of 2023. I was blown away by it. Like I want to go see it again. I really want to go see it again. Especially the setting, especially getting to see it in the theater. And again, I it gives me like when I have this kind of an experience, it not only, I mean, on one hand, I'm so elated and thrilled to have this experience, but I part of me also just like um, gets really frustrated and angry about kind of where we are now in the movie world, mostly in regards to how people want to see movies and kind of the lack of interest by most people to go to the movies and have this kind of a magical this magical experience where they just are forgetting about it, they're forsaking it, and they're just like, but yet they're happy to watch something on their computer or watch it on their tiny little TV at home, or and it's all about convenience. And I'm just like, I just don't understand it. I just don't understand it. And it's very frustrating, but it is what it is. And so, and I just can't stand streaming. In my hearts of hearts, I wish streaming would just disappear. It won't. It is a, well, for most people, it's how they see and how they access media. But to me, this experience is why the movie going experience is so important and just amazing. And you know, uh, it just, I come away from the experience of like, wow, I think people suck. Like, I just think people suck because there was nobody in this theater, and just like, it just drives me crazy. I kind of think of it, and again, I try not to be super cynical and super negative, but then I also feel like, well, it's just how I am, and not everybody is, and I realize not everybody has my opinion, and that's totally fine. But when it comes to, I mean, people love their entertainment, people love their films, people love to be immersed in a fictional or a non-fictional environment for a few hours a day. That's never going to go away. People want healthy escapism, from the mundane. But it's the way people do it now that just drives me crazy, and the lack of interest. To me, it's like, you know, I think there's a lot of people out there that can get that kind of experience by, like, say, coming, like, if say someone comes home from a trip to where they go on this great trip where they go all over Europe. And then when they come home, they upload all of their photos to their Instagram page or social media, Facebook, whatever. And they upload all of their photos of their real experience to their platform. And then their friends or people who don't really know them, or it just comes up in their feeds, they see these photos, and for I think a lot of people, to them that like completes that experience. For them, that's them traveling without having to really leave their house, and they're getting that experience, and that's kind of all they need. But to actually experience it itself, oh, that's too much effort. That's going to cost too much money. That means I have to go somewhere. I'm not going to really have that experience. But if I can just look at these photos, and see it from a second or third point of reference, that's just as satisfying. But yet, I'm not really having that experience because I'm not actually in that environment. But they're happy because it's satisfying some part of their brain, because it's the convenience, it's there, it's easy, they can just access it. And they can live their life through those photos, as opposed to actually experiencing what is actually in those photos. It's kind of fucked up. But anyway, um, you have to go see. People, please go see this movie. Please support this movie. It's such an amazing film, and it is for me personally, it's the very definition as to why uh, filmmaking and the experience of going to the movies is the highest art form, and one of the greatest experience one of the greatest experiences that we can have when it comes to entertainment. So thanks again. This is Jason Dean, and we will see you next time. Peace.